In this life, they may come after you, and I'm warning you by my example by allowing them to come after me. If they come after me, the master, then they're going to come after you as well. And this is the example that I've given to you, how you should conduct yourself and how you should act in these scenarios. And don't be afraid, because at the end of the day, you are going to rise up again and you are going to be perfected. And all of these things, these wicked and horrible things that happen, they're not going to matter. That was the message of Christianity in the beginning. It was humanity has now seen that death can be conquered. We are no longer to be afraid of death and Satan. Let Satan and death do whatever they want to do. Let them deal their worst blow that they can imagine, because they are weak and God is stronger. That was the message of Christianity. A very heavy emphasis on the weakness of death and the fact, this was a very central belief to Christianity. Nowadays, if they walk up to people that aren't Christians, these Protestants, and they say, you should know that Jesus, all of his sins were put on you, and he was beaten to a bloody pulp by his father. And his father took his time doing it and nailed him to a piece of wood. And he did that for you, by the way. And it's a very sad thing now. You watch the movies and everything, they want to make it, it's a tragedy. It's so sad. And it was a one-time thing, by the way, because, no, Jesus' sacrifice doesn't have anything to do with you guys, they say. This is how Satan has undone the entire purpose of what Jesus set out to do. Satan completely flips the whole thing on his head. He says, no, I'm not the one that killed Christ. Actually, it was the Father that killed him. So he switches the blame, and then he says, and by the way, Jesus allowing himself to get killed doesn't really have anything to do with you, except for the fact that your sins were put on him at that moment. He had all the sins of the world on him at that moment, somehow put on him. And this should embolden you to sin now, because you don't have to worry about it. The debt's been paid. Whereas in reality, Jesus does this to say, no, this is an inspiring thing. This is a heroic thing. Look at the will of humanity, that we can overcome these things. We can be beaten to a pulp. We can be crucified. We can be scourged. And regardless, we endure through it. We can endure through it. We can give the witness of the faith to others, and then ultimately come out on top through the resurrection. And it was to empower people, is what Jesus and it was supposed to be directly relevant to us. It was to say, wow, he did this for our sake so that we would know what to do. And that's why you have Christian martyrs all the time in the past. They say, we're going to get to be like Christ. We're going to get to die. And we get to die because we say, we don't have an issue with it. We're not even going to fight back, because what's the point? It's weak. We're going to get back up anyway through the resurrection.
Yeah, the fruits of this doctrine is really evil. They paint God in such a wicked light, just like with Calvinism. Truly evil.
Exactly. They say that they not only say that God murdered his own son in a very slow and devious way. This is their God. This is not our God. They have a completely different God from us, number one. But they also manipulated they have their Jewish scriptures, the manipulated scriptures. And in their scriptures, it says that God the Father was happy. He delighted in shedding his son's blood. This is what they read, and this is the sort of thing that they believe. They not only believe that God did it, but that he experienced great pleasure, great joy from it. As if God wasn't furious that they had killed his son.
Yeah, that's what it says in the Masoretic text. But he was pleased to crush him.
That's what it says in the Masoretic. It
Yeah.
says he was pleased to crush his son. Yeah, to crush him, but it's referring to his son, of course.
It doesn't say it in the Septuagint.
Nope, it doesn't say it in the scriptures, in the true scriptures.
And you got to ask
the
yourself,
earliest scriptures.
why would there be such a difference between the Masoretic text of the 10th century and the Septuagint. It's almost like the Jews. I mean, first of all, we have to acknowledge that they made a deliberate change to that verse. Secondly, we have to point out how sadistic they are. That they would even say such a thing. First, they reject Christ, but then they want to say, yeah, but God enjoyed killing his son. What? You don't even believe in Christ, and you're going to add that to your scripture?
And how wicked that the Christians should eventually adopt that and parrot that verse.
It's one of their favorites. God was pleased to crush him.
Yeah, but God did not crush his son. He was pleased with his son by the example that his son gave. That's what he was pleased with. He was pleased that his son had demonstrated the reality of the resurrection of the dead so effectively to humanity, and that he was such a great example, such a great instructor.
Yeah, and he alone could do it, not even the angels. Yeah.
Yes, as clearly evident, the angels had come down initially to act as guides to us, instructors, telling people what not to do and what was right and what was wrong. And then the angels fell into great wickedness and sin, as we all know, which resulted in the giants and eventually the flood. So it was disastrous. But yeah, it was ultimately the Son.
So when you guys were Protestants, did you actually like believe all that then? Like all those like things before?
No,
Of
that took
the
me years to
no?
understand. It took
So
me years
even
to
when
get out
you're
of that mindset, that old
yeah.
mindset. Because the problem is you kind of carry over that old mindset to the new one. Like you're still kind of working in the same framework, when you should. The best advice that I could give you is you just need to erase all of it and start from scratch. That's the that's going to be most beneficial and helpful to you. Because what happens is when these people today, the Protestants, even though they believe in something modern, they've never heard before what the early Christians believe. So to them, they're like, that's new, that's fringe, that's weird. They say that's a weird doctrine, even though they're the ones believing something completely new, completely modern. But when they hear it, though, they say, this is how they react, because they're still thinking of it in this legal court kind of mindset where like it's this like legal contract between God and Jesus, that like, okay, sign here. Yeah, this page says that all the sins are going to go on you of humanity. This page says that you can't, that you have to forgive them afterwards. Sign right there at the bottom. Um, and that's kind of how like they think of it. They think of it in like this very um just this very like court kind of way. I don't know how to describe it. And anyway, they then think of the original mindset in the same sort of way, where they're like, "Oh, so you're saying then that God had to make a deal with Satan? Like they had to get together and agree on that? That to like pay a ransom on behalf of humanity to Satan, that it was Christ's life? Why would God have to like engage in this sort of thing with Satan?" But that's because they're thinking of it so like in terms of like a contract being present, or some sort of formal um like conversation occurring in heaven, is like what's imagining in their minds, that Satan is saying, okay, I have power over humanity now. I just own them. I just do. Okay, you have to accept that I own them, and these are my conditions. You have to become a man and die, and I guess I'll give them up if you're willing to do that. This is the agreement. Sign right here. That's how they think of it. But it's much more organic. It's much more natural that it occurred. Humanity willingly decided to obey Satan over God in the garden, and we continue to obey him and become wicked. And he, in a sense, became our master in that way, and became, in a sense, the God of this world, because he had such a powerful sway over humanity by making them sin. And so effectively, our master wasn't God anymore, because we weren't treating him as a master. We weren't obeying him. We were obeying the will of Satan and carrying out acts of wickedness and sin. And so Jesus, to combat this, entered the world as a man to give us the perfect example um, through his life, and then also to teach us directly by his own mouth. He did this to become a man to teach us directly, to give us the perfect example of how we ought to live by his own example. And the natural consequence of entering Satan's domain in this way was that Satan was going to send people under his influence to kill him. And that happened again and again. When he was an infant, Herod tried to kill him as a baby. When he was an adult and he was teaching people, several times they tried to kill him. They picked up rocks. They tried to throw him off a cliff at one point, if you guys remember. And he evaded all those times because he still had more to teach humanity. But when the time came that he had done what he needed to do and he was ready to depart this life, it was in the final part of his instruction to us, his tutorial, as it were, on how to live life, was to willingly allow Satan to kill him and hand himself over to the enemy. Because we were going to be attacked also. The Christians were going to be attacked. He says, everyone in my, people in my name, they will be falsely accused. They will be betrayed by their own family members and they will be killed. So before he departs, he's already became a man, and it's necessary then for him to, if you think about like, okay, Jesus, his mission was to come to earth as a man, to give us the perfect example of how we ought to live as the true instructor, right? Well, then he has to give us an example of how we ought to die and give us an example of the doctrine that he had been teaching, the resurrection. He had been teaching it up to that point, but then he proves it by his own example to his followers, giving them confidence in it. And so it was very beneficial for a few different reasons that he allowed himself to be killed. Like I said earlier, to show the powerlessness of Satan and death, and he also allowed it to be so public so that everybody would see him die, and then later see him resurrected. He didn't die of some mild cough in a private room. Imagine, guys, if Jesus said, I feel a little sick. And then somebody said, I checked his pulse. No, believe me, I checked it. He's dead in there. He's dead in that room. And then 3 days later, he came out and he's like, guys, I'm alive again. Everybody'd be like, maybe, I don't know. Maybe he did die of his sickness. But instead, what Jesus did was he made it a very public spectacle. He was literally on display. He was in the air. His corpse was in the air for all to see. And it was so badly beaten and battered that it was beyond the point of recognition, even. I mean, it wasn't just like a minor flesh wound that he said, oh, I died from that. Or like, oh, it was poison in my drink. I assure you, there was poison in there. It was a very visible, like, he had been scourged, he had been beaten, he had nails put through him. He is dead. And then they see him come back in the resurrection. So it gave all confidence to the fact that he truly did resurrect from the dead. So, yeah, there's a lot of things about the resurrection like that it took me time to understand. But just again, though, my main point just was, before I get sidetracked, was just it's a natural thing. The ransom, as it's commonly referred to. If you ever hear people talk about it, they say it's the ransom theory. That's dumb, just because it's not a theory. This is just what all Christians believed for the longest time. This is like the Christian belief, the default position. And well, obviously, it's not to say that, oh, we know everything that there is to know about how the resurrection occurred and everything like that. There's still a lot of mystery as to everything that happened, and the things that occurred are beyond our mere words. But nevertheless, we do have a basic understanding of what occurred, and it was that Jesus ultimately paid the price of a ransom. We had been held captive by sin, by Satan, and he entered into that domain to teach us and pull us out of Egypt, pull us out of slavery to Pharaoh. And as a consequence of that, he was attacked by people that were still wanting to obey Satan. That was the price. But he was willing to pay the price because what resulted in it was, everybody realizing, wow, Jesus was the Son of God. He truly was. He was just resurrected. And so he won in the end. He defeated Satan. He defeated death. And he acts as an example to us, even though that was so long ago now. That's an enduring legacy. That's an enduring example to all human beings that are alive.
Yeah, the real version of Christianity is much more epic and inspiring than the watered down, shameful, polluted version of Christianity. It should be no surprise to you why so many Christians latched onto it, why they saw that this is the fulfillment of human potential. Jesus is the ideal human, the greatest possible human that ever lived. What he accomplished was so epic. He is the ultimate hero. It's the ultimate hero's journey story. And sacrifice also is what makes a story incredibly inspiring and memorable. And no one has ever made a greater sacrifice than what Jesus made. That he was God, and he gave up everything to become a man. And not just a glorious man, but the most inglorious and disrespected and insulted man. And to die the most shameful death, to be completely humiliated. That's an extremely meaningful story. But Christians today miss so much of what this life is all about and what a great story Jesus' own story is. That ultimately, he's the star of this story of mankind. He's the big hero, he's the savior. And how can people miss something so fundamental to Jesus' life story? They make his death such a pathetic or confusing thing, such a bizarre, weird thing. Atheists always ask that question. Oh, so God died for himself? God offered himself as a sacrifice to himself? Or, they're always so confused about what in the world's going on when Jesus died on the cross.
And they say it's barbaric because what people believe is barbaric.
Yes, their criticisms are just a lot of the time. But their criticism is of Protestant heresy, not of true Christianity. Or we should even say Catholic heresy, because the Catholics were all about that. Their guy Anselm, he really pushed that idea of Jesus being murdered by the Father. In the 1100s.
I was watching one of your the Old Testament videos saying that Jesus is the God of the Old Testament. So just to confirm, are you saying that in the Garden of Eve, that was actually Jesus talking to Adam
Yes.
and Eve?
Yes. All those instances when it says that God was walking in the garden and he was calling out to them, "Where are you?" When he shut the door of the ark, when he
Mm.
appeared under the tree to Abraham and sat and ate with him and then spoke with him about the impending doom of Sodom and Gomorrah, when he wrestled with Jacob. Yeah, all of that is Jesus, the Logos, the Son of God.
So the only time then that we've seen the Father speak in the Old Testament is literally when he's creating the world. And the rest is
There
Jesus.
are instances in the Psalms where it is from the Father's perspective throughout. And you have to also keep in mind that Jesus truly is the angel of the Lord. That's why it's the angel of the Lord. He
Mm.
he is speaking on behalf of his Father. So you can
100%.
also ascribe everything that he's saying to the Father. But as far as like your most basic, like what you're fundamentally asking is, yeah, like humanity has not been interacting with the Father though. Humanity has been interacting with the Son the entire time. They never heard the Father's voice.
Well, they heard thunder. They did hear thunder at the
I'm
time.
talking about in the Old Testament,
Oh,
though.
yes, yes, only Old Testament. In
Yeah,
New Testament,
I was wondering if anybody was going to like bring that up, Luke. I thought somebody might bring that up, but I'm just talking about in the Old Testament. Yeah, when he's speaking to Moses, when it says the finger of God made the 10 commandments on the stones and gave Moses the law, that's all Jesus. That's the Logos.
And the church fathers talk about that a lot.
Oh, yes, and I will tell you also, even the Jews believed that. I actually have a video planned at some point talking about how at least one Jew in particular, even really before the time of Christ, had pretty much understood the concept of the Trinity very fascinatingly, just purely from the Old Testament, saying that the Logos is the Son of God, the one who interacts with humanity, and that
But
he
that's
is the
just the
begotten
word,
Son of
right?
God. What's that?
Is logos just the word?
It's more than the word. It's generally how we translate it in English. We translate it as word, but that word, that the logos in Greek, it's much more. It can't really be translated into English without using multiple words because its meaning is very broad in Greek. It's not just word, but it's also thought. It's also reason. It's also rationality. It's wisdom. It's it's intelligent speech. It's it is the thing that makes humans human and separates us from the animals. It is the divine logos from the Father.
But I thought chimps have 99% of our DNA.
What's that?
I thought monkeys had 99% of our DNA.
Don't they also say like a banana does or something like that? I mean, it's so silly with like the DNA tests. They do that with other things, and it's like this is comical. But no, yeah, the that's generally. I mean, that's how they always referred to him. And the thing is, it's very important to keep in mind that that's what John is talking about at the beginning of his gospel. He says, "In the beginning, um, the Logos was with the God, the Father, the one true God." And the Logos was itself also divine. And the Logos was made flesh, and his name was Jesus Christ. That was a very big statement. That was a very important opening at the time because the Jews largely believed that the Logos was the one doing all those things in the Old Testament. They did not believe that it was just a like God the Father has a body and he has a beard. He's the man in the sky and he just comes down every now and then. They believed that God is invisible. God does not have a body. God does not have a voice. God is in all things. God is completely incomprehensible and cannot be seen or heard. But he begot a son, the Logos, that is capable of interacting with humanity on his behalf. And that's why he's called the angel of the Lord, because he is the messenger of God. But he is himself divine, being born from God. But he is somewhere between us and the Father, that he is capable of being more personable with us and interacting with us and speaking to us.
Hmm.
He is he is the Father in a more tangible way, in a sense. That's why he says, "If you've seen me, you've seen the Father," because there's nothing to see about the Father. The Father is completely invisible, but he's made visible literally by his Son, because his Son truly is his representative. His Son represents him. His Son not only represents him as if like he was just like hired for that position. I don't mean it to sound anything like that. It's a representation that goes
Cool.
beyond our mere words. It's not just a job of representation. It is. It's not just like a duty, but it's also a nature. He naturally represents the Father because he is divine. He is the Son of God. He represents his Father in likeness, in actions, in words, in decisions, in deeds, in morality, in all things.
Yeah, when I'm reading the New Testament, I just assume that everything Jesus is saying is exactly what the Father is saying. As it is.
Yeah, he came to say everything that the Father wanted him to say. He says, I say nothing of my own volition. And what does he mean by that? Because clearly he has a will. He's the Son of God. But he is saying that he has the same will as the Father. The Father is the source of that will. And everything that he says is essentially from the Father and what the Father wanted us to hear.
Well, Nolan, were you also talking about modernism? Because I just came and I had another question, but I didn't want to disturb if you were still talking about that.
No, go for it. What's your question?
I was just wondering on because Orthodox also believe like they pretty much have the same doctrine that was given to the apostles. So why is it that we're like quite different from them in some key areas?
Well, anyone can make a claim. Anyone can say we have the doctrine from the apostles. The fortunate thing about it is that that claim can actually be verified. And the way that you can verify that is just by seeing whether or not the early Christians believed that. What they said was apostolic. What they said was universally practiced by all Christians. What they said was true, truly Christian, and what they said was not Christian, was not tolerated. And that's all that you have to do. Anybody that tells you, they say, we believe what the apostles believe, we believe what's from the very beginning. That's the fortunate thing about the church fathers is you can just go and verify their claim and see whether or not they're lying to you. And in the case of the Orthodox and the Catholics, they're lying. And they admit that they are lying. They say we have the ability to change doctrine. We have the ability to, as they say, bind and loose. They say we can bind certain doctrines, we can invent doctrines, we can loose doctrines. If it's inconvenient, if we don't like it anymore, we have the power to change the religion.
Isn't that
That's
no
not me
different
putting
from
words in their mouth.
Wait, so they have powers of reality warping then? If they can change the concept of truth?
They can change reality. They can change, yeah, exactly. They're very powerful. If they get together in a council, nothing can stop them. That's really the thing. They can change gravity if they want to with a council. They can do whatever they want. It's remarkable.
isn't that what Protestants do? They just say that they have recent developments.
Yes, but the difference with the Orthodox is they say that they have the right to do that. They say the Protestants are just like individuals, but they say we have the right to do that because we can trace our lineage from all the way back to the apostles, they say, the Catholics and the
Mm.
Orthodox. But even if you have the lineage, that doesn't give you the right then to change doctrines. The job of the whole point of the lineage is to preserve the doctrines. It's a complete reversal, a complete subversion of the whole point of the lineage. The point of the lineage is to say, I've been teaching the same thing as my master, who was teaching the same thing as his master. And eventually, after saying that several times, we get back to Peter or Paul or, any one of the apostles. But they say, no, we have the right to just subvert it. And they do subvert it. They say we can subvert things concerning marriage. We know what the apostles, we know what the early Christians believed, that they were willing to excommunicate people over this sort of thing. But we're willing to say, hey, you can get remarried. You can have a second marriage while your spouse is still alive. We have loosed that ancient command, that apostolic command that was practiced by the universal church. We have the authority to loose it. That's what they say. Unironically, no putting words in their mouth. I've got a recording of speaking to one of the monks And that's what he says. They say we know that it's different now, but it's allowed to be different because we have the lineage, and the lineage gives us the power to just change the faith. But that, as I said, that defeats the whole point of the lineage.
Yeah, I was gonna say something about that. Where did this whole idea of like evolving doctrine come from? Did it come from the Catholics
From Satan.
originally?
It's been repeated. It's been repeated by the heretics from the beginning. The idea that doctrine can develop over time, or that there were these secret doctrines which the apostles secretly relayed to their special disciples, but not to the bishops they appointed over the churches. That's from the Gnostics. The Gnostics taught people, oh, no, this is from the apostles, but the apostles secretly transferred it. And, other times they'll push the doctrines that, through new revelations, things are revealed and changed. And it's all from all the different heretical sects. It's all demonic, and it's necessary that they invent ideas like that. That's the only way they can escape it. They have to set aside the true traditions with some ridiculous excuse like, oh, well, there's a sacred tradition nobody knew about, or, well, it had to be changed.
Or we all have the Holy Spirit to get together and decide what is the will of God, in the case of the Orthodox and the Catholics.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember when I used to go to Catholic school, and they didn't really teach me the doctrines of like Christ. They just taught me like to pray to Mary and stuff. And my teacher at that time for the Sunday school was a woman, and I was very young, so I didn't really care much. But yeah, it'll teach me about like communion, confession, when you could go to like those little boxes, and then you talk to like quote unquote a priest, and you confess your sins, and they give you like Hail Marys or whatever. Never
Right.
understood like any of that at all. I didn't even know where that even came from because they were just teaching us stuff like that. And then yeah, they'll just teach
The
us.
private
They wouldn't
confession
even like
occurred.
read the Bible like that
Oh,
either.
yeah, no. They don't read the scriptures, and they don't read the fathers. They don't read the fathers. They appeal to the fathers, but they kind of want everybody just to be like ignorant of the fathers. And they just want you to be slightly knowledgeable about the fathers, but not too knowledgeable. And as far as the private confession goes, that developed sometime, I guess, in like the 4th or the 5th centuries when that started. But of course, before that, as we said before, confession was always public, confessing both in front of the bishop and also all fellow Christians.
Is it, you made a comment earlier about the Council of Nicaea. Is it true that after the council, when Constantine converted to Christianity, the reason why the church fell away is because the Christians got soft and politics became involved in the ordination of the bishops?
Certainly, it became the whole thing became very corrupted. Quickly, emperors were appointing bishops, if you can imagine such a thing. Emperors ordaining and deposing bishops that they don't like. Secular authorities getting involved in matters of the church. And it should also be mentioned that Constantine, much later in life, and his son became Arians. So they went back on the Council of Nicaea anyway. And they were deposing several bishops and then replacing bishops with their own people that were previously held positions in government. And they said, you were a good commanding officer. We're going to put you in charge of a church. I don't know anything about Christianity, though. That's okay. You'll learn. You'll figure it out. That's not a parody. That's not a joke. That's what happened.
Do they acknowledge that?
Guys, some of the most prominent bishops, some of the most loved bishops, I'm literally putting together quotes here. There's Ambrose right below where I'm working. But Ambrose, guys, was the mayor, basically, the governor of the city of Milan. Ambrose lived in the 300s. He's one of the most loved bishops of the post-Nicene era, alongside John Chrysostom and Basil. And he was not even a baptized Christian, which was rare back then for somebody not to be a baptized Christian. There were so many Christians. It was so popular to be Christian. But he had never even been baptized. And at the time when the previous bishop of Milan had died, the Christians were gathered together in their little cathedral that the emperors had allowed to be built. And he was there. He was there because he's the governor, and he wants to see, who the Christians are going to elect as the bishop. And so Ambrose is there, overseeing this, just watching. He's not even interfering. And the people are discussing. The people are voting and stuff, asking who's going to be the bishop, and they're giving their opinions. And some of the people started saying, "How about Ambrose? He's been a good governor over our city." And they said, "Yeah, Ambrose, Ambrose." And they start calling for Ambrose to be made the bishop. Now remember, guys, he's not in the clergy. Nobody can be ordained as a bishop if they haven't been a presbyter first, and nobody can be a presbyter until they've been a deacon, and no one can be a deacon unless they've been a Christian, and no one can be a Christian unless they've been a catechumen. And guys, you cannot be a catechumen if you're in government. That's the teaching of the church. And do you guys know what they did on the spot? They baptized him on the spot and then ordained him as bishop over the city of Milan on the spot. He had never even read the Bible before. And that was Ambrose. Now, Ambrose is the one who ordained Augustine as bishop of Hippo. So a false bishop ordaining another person as bishop.
Is Augustine the Calvinist?
Yes, you might as well say that.
You should show Aaron, Luke, that quote from Athanasius talking about the emperors getting involved and kicking people out.
Yes, we've
of
read
office.
this. We've read this quote a few times. And by the way, Nolan, you gave such a good speech. I should have started recording earlier, but I did start recording at some point. So a lot of what you said was recorded, but unfortunately, a lot of it was not. But you know what? We'll keep talking about these things for years. Don't be too sad.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, let's see here. What am I looking up? Let's see here.
Well, while you do that, I'm gonna ask one more question. In the volume 3 of the Ante-Nicene Fathers, what books are in there? Is it just the short works of Tertullian?
Yeah, I think 3 is just all Latin Tertullian stuff. Yeah,
All Tertullian.
yeah.
So because I've been reading his work already.
His works are wonderful. You'll learn a lot from reading Tertullian.
Yeah, I'm on the Veiling of Virgins.
Very nice.
Yeah. All right. But that's it, though. I just wanted to know because I'll probably be starting it soon.
All right,
Oh,
guys.
you haven't started the book just yet?
What book?
On the Veiling of Virgins?
I read a bit of it, but I want to kind of finish just Armada.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. That's wonderful. That's so impressive that you're doing that.
Yeah, I just finished that what was it? The third book, because I don't know if it was Greek or whatever, but I think you sent me the file and I just read it today. Yeah, that's it.
Good deal.
Here's a quote.
But yeah, Luke,
guys,
do you have that quote for Aaron?
I do. This is Athanasius after he was exiled. He wrote a little history, and he talks about exactly what happened after Constantine's son became emperor, that Constantine's son was an Arian, just like his dad, and that he was exiling all the bishops out of the church. If they were not Arians, he was kicking them out, and it had reached a point where there were no more actual Christian bishops anywhere. There were only either falsely ordained bishops or a very large number of bishops who had, out of fear and cowardice, relented and subscribed to the doctrine of Arianism. I can read some more quotes on this subject after Athanasius, but guys, this is just barely skimming the surface of the history of how the church fell away after Nicaea. Here's Athanasius. He says he's responding to this wicked emperor Constantius, the son of Constantine, how he is now giving decrees to the church about what it shall believe, and it better obey his decree, or they're not in the church anymore. He says, "For if a judgment had been passed by bishops, what concern had the emperor with it? Or if it was only a threat of the emperor, what need, in that case, was there of the so-named bishops? When was such a thing heard of before, from the beginning of the world? When did a judgment of the church receive its validity from the emperor? Or rather, when was his decree ever recognized by the church? There have been many councils held heretofore, and many judgments passed by the church, but the fathers never sought the consent of the emperor thereto, nor did the emperor busy himself with the affairs of the church. The apostle Paul had friends among them of Caesar's household, and in his epistle to the Philippians he sent salutations from them, but he never took them as his associates in ecclesiastical judgments." So ecclesia, that's where we get the word church. It just means the assembly. So he's saying, the emperor was never involved in church judgments. He says, "Now, however, we have witnessed a novel spectacle, which is a discovery of the Arian heresy. Heretics have assembled together with the Emperor Constantius, in order that he, alleging the authority of the bishops, may exercise his power against whomsoever he pleases, and while he persecutes, may avoid the name of persecutor, and that they, supported by the emperor's government, may conspire the ruin of whomsoever they will, and these are all such as are not as impious as themselves. One might look upon their proceedings as a comedy which they are performing on the stage, in which the pretended bishops are actors, and Constantius the performer of their behests, who makes promises to them, as Herod did to the daughter of Herodias, and they, dancing before him, accomplish through false accusations the banishment and death of the true believers in the Lord. Who indeed has not been injured by their calumnies, meaning their slanders? Whom have not these enemies of Christ conspired to destroy?" So he's saying, who hasn't been affected by this? He's saying everybody has. "Whom has Constantius failed to banish upon charges which they have brought against them? When did he refuse to hear them willingly?" He's talking about hearing the false accusations. "And what is most strange, when did he permit anyone to speak against them, and did not more readily receive their testimony of whatever kind it might be? Where is there a church which now enjoys the privilege of worshiping Christ freely? If a church be a maintainer of true piety, it is in danger. If it dissemble, meaning if it takes a while to decide if they're going to obey him or not, if it dissemble, it abides in fear. Every place is full of hypocrisy and impiety, so far as he is concerned. And wherever there is a pious person and a lover of Christ, and there are many such everywhere, as were the prophets and the great Elijah, they hide themselves, if so be that they can find a faithful friend like Obadiah, and either they withdraw into caves and dens of the earth, or pass their lives in wandering about in the deserts. These men in their madness prefer such calumnies against them as Jezebel invented against Naboth, and the Jews against the Savior, while the emperor, who is the patron of the heresy and wishes to pervert the truth, as Ahab wished to change the vineyard into a garden of herbs, does whatever they desire him to do, for the suggestions he receives from them are agreeable to his own wishes. He says, "Accordingly, he, Constantius, banished, as I said before, the genuine bishops, because they would not profess impious doctrines to suit his own pleasure. After threatening them in this manner, he was not ashamed to declare publicly," this is talking about somebody that he had sent, Constantius sent a messenger to threaten the churches. He'd say, "Hey, subscribe, or the soldiers are going to come and take your bishop away, and this church is going to be handed over to, real Christian Arians." So the messenger says, "After threatening them in this manner, he, the messenger, was not ashamed to declare publicly with a loud voice, 'The emperor disclaims Athanasius, and has commanded that the churches be given up to the Arians.'" And he says, "And to agree to receive as their bishop whomsoever the emperor shall send them." And then Athanasius says, of course, Constantius, he's being sarcastic here, of course, Constantius was strictly upholding the canon of the church when he caused this to be done, when instead of requiring letters from the church, he demanded them of the marketplace, and instead of the people, he asked them of the wardens of the temples. So he's saying these guys are all pagans who are doing this. He was conscious that he was not sending a bishop to preside over Christians, but a certain intruder for those who subscribe to his terms. Now, you want to know one of the most astonishing things about all this, guys? And guys, even the big bishops, like of Rome, they were Arians. They subscribed to Arianism. They were open Arians. So that means they denied the deity of Christ. They denied the most basic doctrine of Christianity. So they were not Christians, they were heretics. And yet the Catholics will say, well, whoever was ordained after that guy, he's a legitimate bishop. And so, despite the fact that apostolic succession was utterly annihilated after Nicaea, they think that heretic bishops, who are really no bishops at all, ordaining other bishops after them, are preserving apostolic succession. But, you don't even hear these people saying that. These bishops, the real bishops, are saying, no, it's destroyed. It's over. We have fake bishops in the churches now. How can a fake bishop ordain a true bishop? But we will confront the Catholics and Orthodox when the time is right. We will go over all these things and expose their lies. Nolan, the other day we were just listening. Here, I've just got to show you this clip. You're gonna like this. So, Nolan, that big video called Failure of Eastern Orthodoxy? It's a pretty good video. It's made by a Calvinist, but for the most part, it does a great job of exposing the heresy
Yes.
of the Orthodox Church. Well, there's this video where Craig Truglia and John Whiteford, who are big Orthodox apologists, they respond to the video, and at 13 minutes, I saved this timestamp of Craig saying something absolutely hilarious. But he's like, where's this conspiracy theory coming from that says Christianity changed immediately after Constantine? He's like, where's the written evidence? This man has never opened a book before. But listen to this clip. You're going to like it.
Your church. So I wanted to maybe say this because the premise is, I think, everything. Now, I could be wrong, but here's my impression watching the film, which is the whole thesis essentially is, unless the doctrine is pre-Nicaea, it's irrelevant. And so
he's saying, according to this video, if you can't find a doctrine before Nicaea, then that doctrine is irrelevant. And actually, the video says something more specific. It says it's heresy, which is correct. If you can't find it before Nicaea, it has to be heresy.
So kind of like the working conspiracy theory sort of is. It's never explained exactly how Theodosius or Constantine did this, but it's sort of like anything after Constantine, the church is just too corrupt and too many bad things, and somehow it's connected to Roman policy.
I mean, do you see how completely out of touch he is, guys? He's like, well, I don't understand. Why are they saying like the church changed after Constantine? Like, give me a break. That's a conspiracy theory. He said this is the working conspiracy theory. Unbelievable. I mean, he goes on, but it's just torture.
I just think the overall thesis just lacks a basis in the written evidence. Like we don't have anything from Constantine or Theodosius where they're requiring asceticism and some of the things that are or Marian doctrine, some things that are disputed.
See, he's playing games. He's so good at attacking straw mans. I mean, we know that Marian doctrine didn't exist that early. Of course, we have no written evidence of Constantine requiring that they worship Mary. Nobody was worshiping Mary at that time. But you know what Constantine was doing? He was drafting Christians to fight in wars. He and his son Constantius and the other bishops after them, or the other emperors after them, were destroying apostolic succession by claiming the authority to ordain bishops, which they do not possess. Those were the two biggest heresies, the two biggest changes of the church after Constantine. It was bishops being ordained by emperors, Christians now engaging in war, and, of course, the Arian heresy, which all the bishops embraced.
And the emperor's deciding what is true or not.
Yes, simply incredible. Listen to. Well, let's read a few quotes here. Let's read Gregory of Nazianzus. He's living in 360. He says, "Surely the pastors have done foolishly, for accepting a very few, who either on account of their insignificance were passed over, or who by reason of their virtue resisted, and who were to be left as a seed and root for the springing up again and revival of Israel by the influences of the Spirit, all temporized." He's saying all bishops temporized. That means they became secular. They weren't Christians anymore. He says, all temporized, only differing from each other in this, that some succumbed earlier and others later. Some were foremost champions and leaders in the impiety, and others joined the second rank of the battle, being overcome by fear, or by interest, or by flattery, or what was the most excusable, by their own ignorance. Here is Jerome. He says, nearly all the churches in the whole world, under the pretense of peace and of the emperor, are polluted with the communion of the Arians. He says, the Catholics of Christendom were strangely surprised to find that the council had made Arians of them. So he's saying all the Christians woke up one day, essentially, and found that all their emperors were Arians, and were saying, yes, we are all emperors. Yes, all of you people in the church, we are now Arians, you understand? And they're saying, what, we are? I thought we just condemned this. Yes. Here's Hilary of Poitiers. He says, I am not speaking of things foreign to my knowledge. I'm not writing about what I'm ignorant of. I have heard and have seen the shortcomings of persons who are round about me, not of laymen, but of bishops. For excepting the bishop Eleusius, and a few with him, for the most part, the 10 Asian provinces within whose boundaries I am situated are truly ignorant of God. And then the Catholic who wrote this article and collected these quotes, he attacks his own church. He says, it is observable that even Eleusius, who is here spoken of as somewhat better than the rest of the other bishops, was a semi-Arian, according to Socrates, and even a persecutor of Catholics at Constantinople, and according to Sozomen, one of those who were active in causing Pope Liberius to give up the Nicene formula. By the 10 Asian provinces is meant the east and south provinces of Asia Minor, pretty nearly as cut off by a line, passing from Cyzicus to Seleucia through Sinada. So, this is a massive portion of land. So Hilary is just saying, everybody all around me. He says, for the most part of the 10 Asian provinces within whose boundaries I'm situated, they are all ignorant of God. Everybody, he says, except one bishop, he says. I can name one bishop. And then the Catholic website says, actually, that guy is pretty much an Arian. He was persecuting. He was a semi-Arian. What a joke. Okay, but I got another good quote for you if you guys want to do some quotes. Let's do this. Let's do, let me give you some nice ones from Athanasius. Okay, so this is a fragment of a letter from Athanasius. Some of them connect it to letter 29 of Athanasius. That's a chopped up letter. Unfortunately, we don't have very good manuscripts of it, so there are only portions of it available. But here is a portion of the letter. We have the beginning part and the middle and nothing from the end. This is what Athanasius says during this time. Here begins the letter of St. Athanasius, Bishop of Alexandria, to his children. May God comfort you. I know, moreover, that not only this thing saddens you, but also the fact that while others have obtained the churches by violence, you are meanwhile cast out from your places. For they hold the places, but you hold the apostolic faith. They are, it is true, in the places, but outside of the true faith, while you are outside the places indeed, but the faith within you. Let us consider whether is the greater, the place or the faith? Clearly, the true faith. Who then has lost more, or who possesses more? He who holds the place, or he who holds the faith? Good indeed is the place, when the apostolic faith is preached there. Holy is it, if the Holy One dwells there. But ye are blessed, who by faith are in the church, dwell upon the foundations of faith, and have full satisfaction, even the highest degree of faith, which remains among you unshaken. For it has come down to you from apostolic tradition, and frequently has accursed envy wished to unsettle it, but has not been able. On the contrary, they have rather been cut off by their attempts to do so. So Athanasius is saying these people who've all kicked us out of the church. They have actually cut themselves off by their attempts to unsettle the truth. He says, For this is it written, or for this is it that is written, thou art the Son of the living God. Blah, blah. Oh, he's talking about how they're denying that Jesus is actually God's, Jesus is divine. He says, For if ever God shall give back the churches, for we think he will, yet without such restoration of the churches, the faith is sufficient for us. And lest speaking without the Scriptures I should seem to speak too strongly, it is well to bring to you the testimony of Scriptures. For remember that the temple indeed was at Jerusalem. The temple was not deserted, aliens had invaded it. Whence also the temple, being at Jerusalem, those exiles went down to Babylon by the judgment of God, who was proving, or rather correcting them. So he's comparing themselves, guys. He is comparing the church to that period of when the exiles were sent to Babylon to correct them. He's saying we're like the exiles, and he's saying, yeah, at that time there were a lot of people still in the temple, but he says they were all invaders. They were aliens who had invaded it. He's saying that's where we are now. There are people who are inhabiting the churches, but they aren't real Christians. They're just invaders. And unfortunately, you can see that Athanasius he's in that post-Nicene mindset of putting a lot of emphasis on the buildings. But at least he's still speaking the truth that, hey, you know what? The buildings don't even matter. We've got the true faith. They may have the places, but we've got the true faith. But if he were wiser, he would recognize that the places don't even matter a teensy-weensy bit. Not at all. They don't matter at all. He says, aliens indeed had held the place, but knew not the Lord of the place, while in that he neither gave answer nor spoke, they were deserted by the truth. What profit then is the place to them? For behold, they that hold the place are charged by them that love God with making it a den of thieves, and with madly making the holy place a house of merchandise and a house of judicial business for themselves, to whom it was unlawful to enter there. Wow, if that isn't the Orthodox and Catholic Church right now. They have literally turned it into a house of merchandise. He says, For this and worse than this is what we have heard, most beloved, from those who are come from thence. However, really then, they seem to hold the church, so much the more truly are they cast out, and they think themselves to be within the truth, but are exiled and in captivity, and gain no advantage by the church alone. And then it cuts off. His next sentence doesn't finish. So he says, they're actually the ones who are exiled and in captivity. He says, we're the ones who are free. So isn't that an amazing thing, guys, that right after Nicaea, the bishops were being kicked out of the churches, and heresy was everywhere in the church. The entire church was heretical. They had rejected the most basic doctrine of the faith. They had even rejected the most basic doctrine that they themselves had just all embraced along with the emperor. And that's exactly what they got. It's what they deserved for allowing the emperor to be involved. They got kicked out. All right, Nolan, you want to hear that quote from Hosius? Or are you gone? He's gone. Such is my life. Nolan said, I need to go to bed. Good night, everyone. Well, it is kind of late, isn't it, guys? We can read these quotes some other time. We're putting them all together. We've got many, many quotes. But I got to do some work, guys. But we will read this later on. I hope it was a good, edifying call.
Definitely.
Yeah, Nolan should join more often. I'm going to go to bed, guys. But I'll see you all again soon.
Have a good night, Luke.
Good night, everybody. It's very good seeing all of you. God be with you. Farewell.